Hello, Roadrunner fans. JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Greg, we're back. Week one of the UTSA football season is here. The Roadrunners opened the 2024 campaign this week against Kennesaw State. Greg, a lot has been made in the preseason and the lead up to this season of the expectations of the Roadrunners. I think to me that's my biggest takeaway leading into this season is they are not shying away from that college football playoff potential conversation. And I think it's a real one, all things considered.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that they should be embracing that possibility. It's certainly something that could be a motivator inside the building and could potentially drive guys a little bit more to know that that goal is out there. But I just think that this is a team that they're probably right to think that they're a realistic contender. If you want to make it as simple as possible, they were picked to finish second in the American, and that's a conference that does quite often produce a team that's capable of this sort of thing. Obviously, that was with a different alignment when Cincinnati and the likes were in the mix. But I think that there's plenty of reason to believe the team that wins the American could have quite the shot at making that playoff spot. And I just think the Roadrunners are good. They got that respect in the league to be picked second, but I think when you look at some of the other teams that nationally get slotted into this theoretical playoff spot, whether it's like a Texas State or I think I saw USF in there for somebody. And a lot of these teams that are maybe more trendy and I don't know if it's disrespectful is too much to say, but just maybe not recognizing sort of what's been built here beyond just the immediate success that UTSA's had with Frank Harris and in the first couple years under Jeff Traylor. I think that they're built to have more success this year and as long as Jeff sticks around. So um, I don't know. It feels like to me that this is a very realistic aspiration for them. How do you sort of size up where they fit into the G5 landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could kind of fit them into the handful of teams, right? Memphis, you throw Texas State in there. We could table them for a week because that's going to be a hot topic next week. I think Liberty may have the best shot, right, based on what their schedule looks like. And I mean, who else is going to be from the Sun Belt, right? I mean, maybe App State, who knows? So you
Yeah,
have to start. Go
I
ahead.
have Memphis and Boise State, I think are probably
Boise
the two.
State, yep. Mountain West, yeah. Yeah,
But
so I mean, obviously, I think it also goes along with the narrative or the want that everybody's kind of been talking about through fall camp of wanting to start fast, right? No mulligans, no early season hiccups. UTSA has very little margins of error, and I think kind of depending on who you ask or how much it matters. I mean, maybe they may have to win some of these games convincingly, right? To make sure that they're involved in the conversation at least early. And I do think UTSA has some early season hype around them. I think there's a little bit of preseason buzz around some of the top 25 voting, but yeah, that's certainly been a topic of discussion of wanting to get off to a better September than in previous Septembers.
yeah, and I think I thought that it would be a case of potentially kind of tightening the rotation and seeing less of the experimentation that we've seen with some of the threes and fours that we've seen in the last couple of years. I just pulled it up right before because I knew we would talk about this. And like last year against Texas State, UTSA played 22 guys on offense and 30 on defense in the second week of the season. And you saw by the end of the year against Tulane, they were down to 18 on offense and 26 on defense. So they trimmed four off of each side essentially. And I actually thought it would be more than that. But generally, that's the point that I would think would be emphasized if they wanted to have a stronger performance early in the year is just have your best guys out there more often with less regard for either the wear and tear factor or just kind of wanting to be fair to everybody and get them a chance in live game reps to see what they can show. And, Jeff said today that he's probably still going to use a deep rotation the same way that he has in previous years. And maybe that's just a thing you say for recruiting or maybe he means it completely and it'll be like that. I know with the Heat in the game against Texas State, they might end up pretty deep in the rotation just out of necessity to keep guys kind of fresh and able to keep going out there. But I think that between that and potentially the physicality ramping up in the fall, which would be kind of scary. I mean, we've seen this team deal with injuries pretty much every year where coming down the stretch or at different points in the season, we're talking about how many healthy guys they have at different positions. We saw it
Yeah.
especially on the offensive line recently. But I think that maybe with the extra bye week this year, it's easier to get away with that. I think the season is probably paced in such a way that they also, presuming everything goes to form against Kennesaw State, have two games on the schedule where they can probably get some guys out in the second half with that in the FCS game that they have in week 4. So I think that generally they're set up to be able to go a little bit harder in the preseason and be ready to be close to peak form in week 2 for Texas State. And then potentially take some off on different spots to try to make sure you can get through the season. But I do think that they are set up to sort of show a little bit more this time of year than in the past.
Yep, I do agree. I think also the schedule, like you mentioned, kind of is in favor towards that more than in years past. So one, I kind of want to pivot a little bit because we don't always get this kind of access. Last week we were able to talk to the coordinators.
Mhm.
And what were your biggest takeaways from, Justin Burke and Jess Lepp? Obviously, two guys that have had success in their time here. One has been here longer than the other in that role. So, what were your biggest takeaways from those two guys' conversation?
Yeah, it was good just to hear from Justin Burke. Obviously it's a guy that's talked about a lot, and especially when we talked about the move from coaching on the field to coaching up in the press box and the
Right,
impact that
right.
it had on the offense. To actually hear his perspective on why that was different is, it's a lot of the same things Jeff told us, but it's still nice to hear it from him directly. And I think that with Coach Lepp, it's just nice to hear about a lot of the different guys that we kind of talk about during the season and just have an extra perspective other than from teammates who can, their reviews are always pretty glowing. You don't
Yeah,
get a whole
yeah,
lot of in-depth insight there most of the time. And then from Jeff's gonna, tell us what he's gonna tell us. But I think Jeff's working with them, especially since Coach Traylor is probably more concentrated on offense generally. It's just nice to hear
yeah,
from the defense coordinator about some of those guys and the people who have started to stand out. And I thought it was interesting that he was pretty honest about the defensive line rotation, for
yeah,
example, not as deep as it had been, but on the other end of the spectrum, I think he spoke pretty glowingly of the cornerback room, which I think is
yeah.
something that Jeff has reflected as well. So just to get those insights, I thought was really. What did you take away from it?
I thought it was fascinating how they both kind of were on each end of the spectrum with the coaching on the field from coaching in the box because they both do it from different spots. Although Burke was on the field at some point last season before he moved. Do I have that right? Right?
Yeah, I think it was maybe in the bowl game he had been
Yeah,
down there, and if
yeah,
not, it was certainly the first few games of the year where, and then it became a talking point that
yeah.
he didn't have the same view of it and wasn't
Right,
calling
right.
the games he felt he could from above.
I was also fascinated with the helmet communication discussion. I know
Right.
you talked about that a lot with some of the guys. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think that's going to eliminate any of the signaling, right? Especially the with how UTSA goes, but that was an interesting facet. And I kind of towards the end of both conversation, both guys kind of reflected on their time here, right? About how the way things here are not the way they are everywhere else. So I think especially for Justin Burke, I mean, he's a guy that you could say could move up right in this industry. So it's kind of like what's his long term plans, and he kind of wanted to be where his feet were. If I'm summarizing that correct, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you mentioned the part about how things are different here. That word is like starting to eat away at me because everybody says the culture is just different and the way we
Yeah,
practice is just different and the way Jeff runs the program is just different. And you ask how and why and in what ways. And it's something I'd love to be able to illustrate better in a story, but it's all whether it's stuff that they intentionally keep internal or if it's just something
yeah,
that's that tangible that they have a hard time describing it. It's hard to really get to the root of that. But I mean, the
yeah,
results seem to show and the whether it's like you want to talk about the rate of guys they lose to transfers relative to guys they could lose to transfers or just how people get integrated into the culture here and things like that. I guess there's certainly something to it. So that's something that's always been hard to pin down, and maybe we got an inch
yeah.
closer there. But
Yep, yep. A little bit. Let's turn to the depth chart. We saw the first depth chart of the season released last week. I don't want to go through every single position because I don't
we
know that
could if
well, I don't know that we have enough time with our Zoom here, and
you.
I don't know that there were many surprises on there. Right, like it's kind of what we expected for the most part. What were your biggest takeaways on the offense?
Well, I think the first thing that I looked at was the offensive line because we were sort of
Right.
curious how it's going to work out. And when I've been sort of evaluating this team and how I think they're going to do, one of the things I've tried to look for is red flags, like areas
Yeah.
I'd be concerned about. And it took me a long time to find one, but finally, the offensive line is something that I'm starting to take an extra look at. And so you look at the tackle positions. Kamar Missouri is slated to start on the left, and he played at Rutgers last year. And sorry, there's a puppy back there. You might hear a
Oh,
squeak.
yeah. He probably loves our voices.
Um, but so you saw Kamar Missouri played at Rutgers a decent amount. So obviously that's a guy that you would expect could probably step in and hold his own. But I'm really interested in the right tackle position with Jalen Garth. I
Yes. Yeah.
thought Makai Hart would have a shot there, but It seems like that injury is going to be, I'm not holding my breath on that at this point. The way it
Yeah,
was talked
yeah.
about today, I don't know. It just sounds pretty bleak, but who knows? He could be out there within a couple weeks. It just sort of depends how things progress. But do you know the last time Jalen Garth played like a starter's load on the offensive line? That's
No, I mean, maybe
He was
high
a junior,
school, right?
he was a junior in high school because
Yeah,
he sat out
yeah,
the second half of 2018. He sat out 2019 with that same injury. Redshirted at Texas in 2020. He played 21 snaps in 2021, and then he didn't play in 22, and he was only on special teams last year at Houston. So
yeah,
it has been forever since he was leaned on to take a starting role like this. And if there's any reason to believe that that's not going to be an issue, it's the fact that, they put Venley back at guard, who is a guy they could have looked at tackle if they felt like they didn't have what they needed there. And Demetrius Allen is number two behind Jalen Garth. And there
yeah,
were times where it seemed like if he was going to be a starter, that would have been fine. So
yeah.
if Jalen Garth's ahead of those guys, maybe there's reason to feel like that could be promising. But I do think that
Right.
that's a that I'm going to have an eye on of how well he really holds up.
Yeah, I think the upgrade at right tackle is and left tackle, just the tackle positions is significant. You look at it wasn't that long ago you had a walk on playing there or a
Right.
converted defensive lineman or guards kind of forced to play out of position. So now at
That's
least
the
they have
thing.
with
Not to
all
jump in.
due
Sorry.
yeah, with
And
all due
like
respect to those guys, like at least you have at least guys that fit the body of what a Division 1 tackle looks like.
Right. That too, like Walker Beatty is a backup left guard. So given that he's played tackle before, if it was really bleak out there, you would think he would be at tackle. So I guess we
Right.
have reason to believe that the guys that they have now are better than what we've had in previous years, or else it
Yeah.
wouldn't be the way that it is. It's just something that it's a little bit an unknown to start the year.
Yeah, I obviously quarterback's a big talking discussion. I mean, it is what it is. Jeff's not giving us anything on what he plans. So he did tell us today he wants to name a starter and just kind of roll with it. So he just won't do that until week 1, I guess,
Yeah,
after
you
week
seem to
one.
be, I mean, I have operated for months like it's going to be Owen. You seem to be more
Yeah.
open-minded about this.
Well, I mean, it is what it is. I would be shocked if it's not Owen, right? I mean, Eddie
Okay.
Lee has looked good in what I've seen of him, but I would also say that I think Owen is the guy. But I mean, what are we? We got a small sample size, right? I think I was on someone else's podcast and I'd said, Owen did some good things last year, right? He also did some very bad things, right? So
Yeah,
which Owen are you going to get? And you don't have that cushion to be able to give away a game like
right.
maybe UTSA gave away last year against Houston, right? So
Well,
we'll see.
the very obvious part is that Owen, from the second half of the Tennessee game, seemed to take the job and hold it. And there
Yeah,
were, looking back, there were even more times than I remembered where UTSA went to a second quarterback, whether it was late in the game that was a blowout or if Frank got banged up for a couple plays. And Owen was on the field a lot, and Eddie was not. And then obviously Owen started in the bowl game and performed pretty well. So it seemed like he had a pretty significant head start. And they were going to say all the right things about the competition because that's what you have to do to make sure you keep your guys from feeling discouraged or transferring or
yeah,
not giving their effort and pushing for that job and all the different reasons that you paint it the way it is. But it has never felt to me like Owen wasn't the starting quarterback. And usually I don't try to over analyze our interviews and take too much from that, but just Owen talks a lot more like the
mhm,
starter and somebody who's in command of the offense compared to the way
right.
Eddie Lee handles these situations. And even just something like in particular, I think Eddie Lee, we asked about kind of making adjustments at the line of scrimmage and stuff. And he was like, they don't ask me to do too much of that. And when you
Yeah,
ask Owen about that, he's like, yeah, I'm taking it to the next level of being prepared to move this guy here and this guy that like he's a lot more
yeah,
seemingly prepared to take charge of that part of it too. And I just think all those things speak to the fact that he seems like he's in line to be the guy. Plus, he's got more experience too. We forget that he
yep,
played at college.
yep, yep. I do think it will be Owen, but we'll see in a few days, right? So would you care to join me on uh the hype train that is the UTSA running back rooms of you have the three-headed monster on the depth chart, but you have some super talented guys not even on the depth chart that I think we're going to see. So it'll be interesting to see how they split those carries, right? Like I don't know how they keep some of these guys off the field, to be honest.
Right. Well, I really do think we're in for kind of a resurgent Kavorian Barnes year because there were times last year where he didn't look that great, to be honest. And
Right. Yeah.
I was a little bit worried about his weight, and it seems like he trimmed down a little bit and might be a little bit faster and more explosive. And then there were plenty of times where Robert Henry looked like the most dangerous guy in the room and was the most effective runner that they might have had. And Rocco's just kind of steady. I don't think you have to worry
Yeah.
too much about him. It seems like he's got everything together off the field from every time we talk to him. So it's not like he's a guy who's going to get out of line or make some issue about how many carries he's getting. He seems like he's going to fill his role and do a good job with it. And then if you get anything at all out of all those other guys, that's just a
Yeah.
bonus. And there's plenty of talent there too.
So circling to the tight end room, we hadn't talked much about that group, right? But there's four of them listed on the depth chart, and it seems like they're pretty high on all four of them, and they may all see some action this year, right?
Yeah, I think the new slimmer Oscar Cardenas has been talked about a lot, and we'll see if
Yeah.
that makes him a more explosive target. I think probably because of some of the big catches that he's made in his career, his overall productivity's probably been overrated a little bit. But
Yeah.
if he is actually going to be a really serviceable weapon in the offense and can even potentially step above that and be in the mix as one of the leading receivers, then that would be a huge bonus for UTSA. And then um, I don't know, maybe you kind of know what you're getting with the Dan Dishman at this point, but it's
Yeah.
the younger guys are a little bit exciting, like the Houston Thomas or the Patrick Overmeyer, and who
Yeah.
knows if one of them either has already grown or at some point grows into this really dynamic kind of vertical threat from the tight end position that is a little bit different of a style than what we've seen from Oscar. So yeah, I think that's an exciting group to keep an eye on, but I think you kind of have to lump it in with the wide receivers because you can only fit so many of those guys on the field, and I think they probably should feel pretty good about what they have at receiver too. I don't know if you want to start breaking that part down.
Yeah, for sure. Another hype train I want you to join me on is the Willie McCoy hype train. A little bit of surprise to see him ahead of JJ Sparkman. A lot of talent there. Obviously, the big story at wide receiver is no JT Clark to start the season. I think he told us it was like an 8 to 10 month time frame. We're kind of right in that window, and it doesn't look like they're rushing him out there like they maybe did last year. So, a strong group regardless. My initial thoughts were I was surprised to see two guys get into the single digits with that group. I think it was pretty obvious that McEwen is maybe the most dynamic of that entire group, but to see Carpenter kind of get in there as well was pretty much a surprise. So a talented group, pretty deep, all things considered.
Yeah, I think Willie McCoy, to your point, has flashed quite a bit when he's been out there. I
Yeah,
know he had some injury issues, and then particularly the scary one with I don't remember if it was officially diagnosed as a concussion or what happened with the when he got his neck issue. I think it was against
yeah,
Rice last year, and that was a very scary situation, and obviously impeded his ability to come back any sooner than the bowl game. And so I think that there's a potential that he takes a step forward. Obviously, Devin McEwen, we should only expect to get better, and he was already
yeah,
really strong last year. And the transfers with DJ Allen and JJ Sparkman are interesting.
yeah,
when the guys come down from the power conference level, it's easy to just say, "Oh, I'm sure I'll make a huge impact here," but there's maybe a reason that they didn't make the biggest impact at that level, and so either they have to develop in a certain way that allows them to take their step up to the next level, or just sort of make more of their opportunity that they might have here. So neither one of those guys comes in projected as a starter. So I mean, it's not the most shocking, although I do think that perhaps Sparkman might have been shoehorned in there just because he brings a different
yeah.
type of. Um, and obviously, I say shoehorned, like not like he wouldn't deserve it. He played really well in the
Right,
spring,
right. Yeah,
and there's plenty of reasons to believe he could have a great year. But I thought mostly because of his profile as a guy who's listed at 6'4" and seems every bit of that to add a different sort of a dimension of somebody who can be that jump ball target until JT gets back. Um, but maybe they're just going with a different kind of approach where it's a little bit more underneath stuff and they just want the quicker, faster guys in there. And so, or it's just whoever is overall the most deserving, which is not a bad way to go about it either. So, and you mentioned Chris Carpenter. I mean, I think we thought last year would be a year that he would have a shot to start and sort of step forward and emerge to the biggest level. I know he dealt with a couple injuries and ended up losing that
yeah.
starting job, Devin McEwen, which there's no shame in that with the level
All
of
right.
production he put there. But every time we talk about Chris Carpenter, it seems like year after year, he just kind of gets his further and further mature and better understanding of the playbook and things like that, and might be ready to have that level of emergence this year that we hadn't seen previously. And then I don't know if you mentioned David Amador. I mean, there was times that
No,
he
missed them.
flashed
Yeah,
while he was out there, and I think there's a lot of different ways he can get involved in the offense. And it's just sort of interesting to have a versatile guy like that out there whenever you can. So I think whoever emerges from that group will be useful. You don't need all six of those guys to be great. I think
yeah.
you can find two or three great ones out of that.
Yep, keep your eye on that David Amador pass this year. I feel like it's coming. So, transitioning to the defense, let's group all the linebackers together.
Mhm.
Obviously, the news of the day is Martavius French is back on the roster. He was suspended for some kind of incident that UTSA kind of didn't tell us what exactly it was. It sounds like he's cleared. He's rejoined the team and he was voted into a single digit. He brings kind of depth to a room that was looking pretty strong without him. To be honest with you, right? You have Jamal Liggin, you have a group of transfers that you know have their strengths in different areas, and I don't know that we expect him to be fully ready for the start of the season from a conditioning standpoint. He basically missed all of the fall preparation. So, just what's your overall take on that linebacker group, and also talking about the money and the will backer too. Like, I think Jamori is kind of the guy that's gonna get all the attention, but there's an injury situation with one of the backups, so you got two young guys, and then it's very, very interesting with, in my opinion, Owen Danye and Owen Pee-wee, right? So those are kind of the four positions. You look at those four linebacker positions, and man, that could be the heart of the defense right there.
For sure. I mean, you start on the inside. We didn't talk about Brevin Randall, and I know that
Yes,
been from Louisiana Tech and has been praised from day one as like a
right.
real standout, kind of a leader, potential starter. I wouldn't have been shocked if he was a single digit guy. They just probably ran out of single digits for that room, given that Jamal got one and Martavius French got one as well. So if he ends up starting because French is still sort of working his way back from a conditioning standpoint, I think that would not be an issue at all for UTSA, and I expect you'll see him out there quite a bit as well. So it'll probably be a three-player rotation for a lot of the year at that spot, and then that says nothing about Kendrick Blackshire and Ian Jackson
Who
coming
looks
in.
scary, right? Kendrick Blackshire looks
Yeah.
scary in person.
And I think the cool thing about when you have a bunch of different guys who could potentially play is you have a guy like that who is situational, like in a goal line situation or like
Yeah.
running downs, that's a guy you want in there. And you don't need him to be great on third down because you have six other guys that you could put out there in those situations when you need it. So I think having guys that are situationally really strong is kind of an interesting twist on this room, on top of the three guys that we would trust for sure in every down situations. And when I mentioned earlier about the red flags, I think the pass rusher spot was the first one that I
Yeah.
thought might be a big issue. And having Nana Anyanwu, I believe I'm saying that correctly, being
Yep.
seeming like he's going to be out for a second straight year is not ideal because he seemed like he was going to be the primary backup behind Jamori. And initially I wasn't even sure about Jamori, but you start to look at him a little bit closer, and some of his stats on a like per snap basis and the havoc rate and things like that are really kind of elite. And so I think with the starters workload, we could see him potentially put together a really strong season. And he's as confident as anybody on the team from the guys that we
Yeah.
talked to in interviews, which is really cool. I think you want to have that mindset that you can step up to a big challenge like that. And the other thing about that is if he gets hurt, I wouldn't be surprised to see Jamal Liggin kind of pass rushing from the
Yeah.
edge. I think he's
Yeah.
been successful as a pass rusher at times in his career. And even, I mean, for me, the biggest shock of the single digits was seeing Owen Pee-wee get in that group. And I
Yes.
know the money backer position is typically more of like a nickel coverage role, but I think there's a lot of faith in his quickly developing pass rush skills too, that whether it's alongside Jamori on some third downs or if it's a case where Jamori has to sub out and they want another pass rusher in there, I think they can get that from more places than I initially anticipated that they'd be
Yeah.
able to, which is on top of the fact that I think Danye is just like a real kind of playmaker. And
You're right.
I've loved asking all the guys about just kind of his presence on the team because he seems like
Yeah.
the loud, most charismatic kind of guy that they have in that unit. And just you see it on the practice field and even the little glimpses that we get. So, and obviously the connection with his brother is really cool. I think, as Day Day went along in his career, we saw him make more and more different kinds of plays and shine in more ways than you expect. And I think we'll see the same thing from Danya this year, that he just continues to add different layers to his game, whether it's becoming better in coverage or becoming an even more potent pass rusher or all the different things that he can do. I think we'll see him really embody what that role is supposed to be.
Yeah. I also do think that, going back to that edge rusher position, that they may end up, if needing to move maybe a defensive lineman over. They have a few different types of defensive linemen in that room.
Yeah.
I think we kind of both looked at Wimberly, the SMU transfer, and say, oh, he's got the physique to do that. And let's just jump into the defensive line. You mentioned Coach Lepp was pretty honest with us that he didn't think maybe they were as deep 1 through 10 as they've been previously, but maybe 1 through 6 or 7, they're maybe as deep as they are previously. A lot of talent up there in the in what they have in the defensive line.
Yeah, and Ronald Triplett has been that guy in the past that can go to outside linebacker, but they've been
Yep.
pretty good to him at an end position the last couple of years. It seems like they've moved some guys around a little bit, and maybe it speaks to was it Otutu? They call him Chad.
Yeah. Chad. Yeah.
So he seems to be slotted in at number 2 in the depth chart as quickly as he is. Might say something about his potential at nose tackle, especially that they were able to move someone outside to make that happen. Now, Ty Leonard's listed here, and I know it's seemed at different stages like he was injured, but
Yeah.
they
Maybe he's
also
back.
aren't listed
Yeah.
injured guys, so maybe he's back. I'm not really sure what to make of that, but when we did that interview, it didn't seem like he was out there, so that might have
Right.
colored that perception a little bit. And if he's back available, that changes things a little bit. So Christian Clayton at end is interesting. I know Jeff said in the spring that he wants to see Christian Clayton potentially take a step forward and be a more dominant player, but I'm kind of bearing the lead here because the front line of Joe Evans and Brandon Brown and Cyrus Simon is really fierce. I would
Really
like
good.
if they just have to play those guys more snaps than they usually did when they were rotating 3 deep.
Right.
It'll be a matter of if they can hold up to it from a conditioning standpoint, because from an ability standpoint, they have everything you could want there. So if it ends up that they lean more on that front line, I think they'll be in pretty good shape.
Yeah. I do think that is again one of the strongest parts of the team just because they're so top heavy, right? I mean that those front guys are awesome. I mean they got a lot of talent. Wrapping up the defense, looking at the secondary, to me, this is where the biggest upgrade happened this year, right? I think Jeff mentioned
Crazy,
in the
right?
beginning of camp that cornerback was an area to watch, and they're really good. They're really good at safety too. I mean, you have some guys with some snaps, and you got some guys with some potential, and some young guys in there too. And I mean, we haven't even heard or seen from Devin, what's our cornerback? It's slipping my mind. Denver Harris. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's like that guy may become an all-time road runner, right, in the next few months. So who's to know what happens if that doesn't happen? They seem like they have some good guys at that position anyway, right?
Yeah, it's just crazy because you lose Cam Alexander, you lose Nick Fortune,
Yeah.
and then you lose DeJuan Griffin, and those are the guys who played all the snaps last year. And so there's a lot of question marks there. And obviously Denver Harris comes in and we'll never really know exactly. I mean, we'll know, I guess, if he's on the field or not. But that behind the scenes stuff and the things that happen off the field that have limited his productivity and ability to play at other places, theoretically, and everything we've heard has not been an issue yet at UTSA. And if he's going to be out there and playing, then he should be excellent. He's got all the talent in the world for it. And then Cyrus Dumas, we sort of last year there was some hype around him, and then it died out really quickly because of injuries that kept him from being out there. And then it seemed like he was going to be gone, so we were lumping him into that turnover. And now he's back, and now he's listed as a starter. And it probably shouldn't be that surprising because if he's healthy, this is kind of the guy they thought that he would be. And so to have a single-digit guy and Zay Frazier be listed as a second teamer tells you a little bit about the talent at that group because usually that's a surefire bet that you're going to be out there as a starter. And if there was one guy I felt confident in, it was Zach Morris. And
Yeah.
not to say he's done anything wrong, but like a guy who's been a starter at the Division 1
Yeah.
FBS level to now be listed as an or with a JUCO guy who just got in here, I don't think it
Yeah.
says anything bad about Zach Morris. I think it says something really promising about all these
A
other guys
JUCO guy. Yeah.
that he could potentially be fifth on the depth chart, and he's the only returning veteran starter that is in the group. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be excited about with that, much more than when I thought it was a red flag.
And then Ken and Elliott at safety. I mean, those seem to be two really solid pieces there.
Yeah, and to have not just that, but the depth behind them with
Yeah.
transfers, Jimmy Wyrick and Jamarius Lewis, there was times we thought that those guys might push for starting spots, which again, it
Right.
says
Right.
about the guys who are starting. It just says that we know that those dudes have some potential as well. So yeah, I think that the secondary has is I don't know if it's ever been necessarily a huge weakness, but I don't know that I would have highlighted it as one of the Roadrunners' strengths in recent years, and this could be a season that it becomes that.
Yep. I made the comment that this may be the deepest roster, too deep depth chart we've seen. I don't think that's too far off. Greg,
Yeah, you
we
want to
got
see it
about
on the
4 minutes here. Yeah, you
you
got
want
you got to see it. You got to see it. I want to ask you one last question here, or in our last 4 minutes, because I don't want to pay for extra Zoom time, everybody,
perspective.
because that's just how it rolls. I think Vegas has the Roadrunners at 8.5 wins this season. I think I like the over on that. It's hard to predict what happens this year. I think there's four massive games, maybe three massive games starting next week at Texas State, right? You think the Roadrunners hit that 9-win mark this season in the regular season?
I would say yes, because I just think it's hard to find the losses.
Right.
I don't
Memphis,
have faith in this league. The fact that you could lose Texas State and still hit the over, I don't know. That's, you don't have to beat Memphis or Texas State for the over to come in. That's pretty, I feel pretty good about that. And maybe they will lose a game that they shouldn't lose, but how many times
right.
in the last few years have they lost games that they shouldn't lose? It doesn't usually go down like that. So,
Not
and
many.
it's an interesting question of whether this team is better than last year's team. And, we spend a lot of time on this video and throughout the year breaking down all these different guys because we have 365 days to talk about 12 Saturdays. But it's not really that complicated. Like if Owen McCown's really good, then they'll do really well. And if he's not, then they probably won't do that well. Like at the end of the day, it's football and the quarterback sort of runs everything. So, I think I feel pretty good about the depth chart when we look at it. And it seems like this should be a really strong team. And I told you, I think that they belong in the G5 mix and I think I have them as a top five G5 program entering the year. But this is just going to come down to quarterback play. If Owen's really good, they'll have a shot to reach those goals. And if not, it's going to be potentially a tough year.
Yep, we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. It all gets started on Saturday at the Alamo Dome. Greg, I'll see you over there. I appreciate you taking the time and joining our preview here. Big 2024 season could be a special one for your Roadrunners. Appreciate everybody watching. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. We'll catch you guys on the next one.